They didn't have mirrors, but they knew exactly how they wanted to be remembered. Every bead, every ornament, every gesture, all calculated for eternity. Why? Perhaps the answer to our modern obsession with beauty is buried right there, between the ice, the vanity, and ancestral memory. For a moment, imagine David Beckham walking the red carpet at the Met Gala, every detail of his appearance carefully planned by a team of stylists, every accessory chosen to communicate status, beauty, and power. The cameras flash thousands of times, capturing every angle of a presence that was meticulously constructed to impress, to seduce, to remain in our collective memory. Now, close your eyes and travel back 34,000 years. You are on the frozen plains of central Russia, where winter lasts 8 months and survival depends on every calorie conserved, every calculated move. There, in the biting cold of the Ice Age, find a tall, robust man, covered in over 3,000 ivory beads, carefully sewn into his leather clothing, with elaborate bracelets on his arms, rings on his fingers, and an ornate diadem circling his head like a Paleolithic crown. This is not a fairy tale. This is not a Hollywood movie. This is Sungir, an archaeological site near the city of Vladimir in Russia that forever changed our understanding of vanity, social hierarchy, and aesthetic sophistication in the Ice Age. Because long before Hollywood invented the concept of a heartthrob, long before fashion became an industry, our Paleolithic ancestors had already discovered something revolutionary and disturbingly modern. Beauty is power, and power is eternal. But who was this Paleolithic Beckham? How did a Stone Age man manage to be buried with more luxury and sophistication than many Egyptian pharaohs? And more importantly, what does his ancestral vanity reveal about our own modern obsession with appearance, status, and the desperate need to be remembered? The answer will surprise you, and maybe scare you a little too. The discovery that changed everything. It was 1955, in the heart of the Cold War. Soviet workers were excavating a red clay quarry 200 kilometers east of Moscow, extracting material for the construction of the new industrialized Soviet Union. The work was routine, mechanical, until the excavator shovels hit something that shouldn't have been there. Bones. Human bones. But not just any bones. Skeletons buried with an ornamental richness that rivaled the tombs of pharaohs, dated to 34,000 years ago, long before agriculture revolutionized human society, long before the first cities emerged from the earth, long before civilization, as we know it, took its first hesitant steps. The Soviet archaeologist Otto Bada, in charge of the excavations, was initially skeptical. How could nomadic hunter-gatherer societies have produced such artistic sophistication? The Marxist ideology of the time preached that only the development of productive forces, agriculture, metallurgy, division of labor, could generate complex art and culture. But the facts were undeniable. What they found challenged not only political ideology, but our entire anthropological understanding of our hunter-gatherer ancestors. They were not brutal cavemen bashing rocks together in a primitive struggle for survival. They were artists, they were aesthetes, they were, in a shockingly modern way, vain. The first skeleton, now catalogued as Sungir 1 in world archaeological literature, was of a man between 35 and 45 years old, exceptionally tall for Paleolithic standards, at about 5'9", 1.76 meters. His bones showed evidence of a physically active life, but with no signs of violence or chronic malnutrition. A man who had lived well, who had been cared for and respected, but it wasn't his physical stature that impressed archaeologists. It was his wardrobe. More than 3,000 mammoth ivory beads covered his body from head to toe, each one geometrically perfect, each one taking approximately 45 minutes to an hour to be sculpted by skilled hands. This means that his body ornaments alone represented more than 3,000 hours of highly specialized craftsmanship. To put it in modern perspective, that's more time than a Hollywood film takes to be completely edited. And that was just the beginning of the discovery that would revolutionize our understanding of Paleolithic social complexity, the science of Paleolithic vanity. But how can we be sure that this was conscious vanity and not just practical functionality disguised as ornamentation? How to distinguish between utilitarian decoration and pure aesthetics? The answer lies in forensic science applied to archaeology, a discipline that has turned hypotheses into certainties. High-resolution microscopic analyses revealed that the beads were not randomly distributed on the body. They formed complex and deliberate geometric patterns arranged in symmetrical rows that meticulously followed the anatomy of the human body. There was a conscious aesthetic, an intentional design, a global artistic vision. Like a modern stylist planning a look for the Met Gala, each element was thought out to contribute to an overall visual effect. The archaeologist Randall White from New York University, one of the world's leading authorities on Paleolithic art, discovered something even more impressive through microscopic wear analyses. The beads showed different degrees of polishing and use. Some showed marks consistent with regular use during life, small scratches, wear on the edges, a patina characteristic of frequent contact with skin and fabrics. Others, however, were pristine, newly made. This reveals something psychologically fascinating. This man not only adorned himself in life to impress contemporaries, he had consciously planned his appearance for eternity. Some beads were specifically created for his burial, to ensure that his post-mortem image was worthy of his earthly vanity. But there were even more layers of sophistication. Elaborate ivory bracelets circled his wrists, each sculpted as if it were an individual work of art. An ornate diadem crowned his head, not a simple band, but a complex architectural piece that required advanced knowledge of ivory properties and bending techniques. A central pendant hung over his chest, positioned to be the first thing any observer would notice. Even his teeth told a story of vanity. Dental analyses revealed non-foodware patterns, small marks consistent with the use of teeth as tools to work fine leather and create decorative objects. This man was not just a user of art. He was a creator, an artisan, a true Ice Age designer. Chemical analyses of the beads revealed traces of red ochre, the first cosmetic in human history. They didn't just create beauty through form, they intensified it through color. The royal family of the Ice Age. But Sungir I, as impressive as he was not alone in his frozen tomb. 50 meters away, archaeologists discovered something that would further challenge our conceptions of Paleolithic society. Sungir II and III, two children buried side by side with an ornamental richness that surpassed even the Paleolithic Beckham, a boy of approximately 12-13 years old and a girl of about 9 to 10 years old, both covered with more than 5,000 ivory beads each. 5,000 beads. That represents more than 5,000 hours of highly specialized craftsmanship for each child, more time than a modern person spends completing elementary and high school combined. But here is the detail that is literally chilling and revolutionary to our understanding of Paleolithic social structures. Mitochondrial DNA analyses performed by the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology revealed that these children were not Sungir I's children. They were not even close relatives. They belonged to different maternal lineages, different family clans. This means that all that monumental wealth, all that colossal artistic investment was a decision made by the entire community. It was not family inheritance being transmitted. It was not accumulated patrilineal wealth. It was collective social status being attributed for reasons we are still trying to understand. Dr. Eric Trinkhaus, from Washington University in St. Louis, one of the world's leading authorities on Paleolithic human evolution, proposed a theory that is simultaneously fascinating and disturbing. These children may have been ritually sacrificed and ornamented as spiritual offerings or symbols of transcendental tribal power. Their premature death was not a tragedy, it was a transformation into living art. But there were more elements that made this burial exceptional. Along with the children were found ivory spears almost 2 meters long, the largest Paleolithic weapons ever discovered. They were not functional. Ivory is an unsuitable material for hunting. They were symbolic, ceremonial, perhaps representing spiritual power or social status that transcended practical utility. The girl wore a complex brooch made of perforated Arctic fox teeth, each tooth representing a successful hunt, each perforation requiring hours of meticulous work. It was a Paleolithic curriculum vitae engraved in bone. Their beauty was political, their vanity was spiritual, their death was art. The technology of ancestral beauty. How is it possible to create 3,000 geometrically perfect beads using only stone tools? How to achieve precision that rivals modern jewelers without metallurgical technology? The answer reveals a technological sophistication that forces us to completely rethink what primitive means. Each Sungir bead was sculpted from mammoth tusks using flint burins, chipped stone tools as sharp as modern surgical scalpels. But it wasn't just a matter of tools, it was a matter of technique, accumulated knowledge, and craftsmanship passed down through generations. The process required 3 complex technical steps, each demanding specialized knowledge. First, cutting uniform cylinders of ivory using segmentation techniques that took advantage of the material's natural tension lines. Second, drilling the center with millimeter precision using manually rotated flint points, a process that required knowledge of ivory anatomy, pressure points, and techniques to prevent cracking. Third, polishing each bead to obtain the desired spherical shape and characteristic shine, using natural abrasives and controlled friction techniques. Archaeological experiments conducted by the University of Tübingen showed that an experienced artisan, someone with decades of practice, needed 45 minutes to 1 hour and 15 minutes to complete a single perfect bead. Inexperienced artisans took up to 3 hours and often produced defective pieces. Considering that some burials had more than 10,000 beads, we're talking about 10,000 to 15,000 hours of highly skilled, specialized work. That's equivalent to 5 to 7 years of full-time work by an artisan dedicated exclusively to ornamental production. It's more time than many architects spend designing skyscrapers, but there were additional complexities that made the process even more impressive. Spectrometric analyses revealed that some beads were dyed with red ochre using techniques that required knowledge of mineral chemical properties, processing temperatures, and color fixation methods. Others were polished with different degrees of intensity to create varied visual effects. Some beads shone like pearls, while others had a matte finish that absorbed light. Even more impressive, the Sungir artisans developed techniques to create beads of different standardized sizes. Dimensional analyses showed that there were at least 5 categories of beads: small, medium, large, extra large, and a special category of elongated cylindrical beads. This indicates not only technical control but systematic aesthetic planning. They didn't just create artisanal beauty, they had industrialized Paleolithic aesthetics. The dark side of Paleolithic vanity. All this monumental ornamental wealth raises a disturbing sociological question that goes straight to the heart of our understanding of human nature. How did supposedly egalitarian hunter-gatherer societies allow or even encourage such aesthetic inequality and the concentration of resources in non-productive activities? Anthropologist Olga Soffer from the University of Illinois, a specialist in Paleolithic societies of Eastern Europe, proposed a theory that is simultaneously revolutionary and unsettling. Sungir may represent the historical birth of human social stratification, the evolutionary moment when some humans began to consider themselves intrinsically superior to others based not on survival skills or practical contributions to the group, but on purely aesthetic symbols of status. This is absolutely revolutionary because it directly challenges the romantic narrative that our hunter-gatherer ancestors lived in Edenic egalitarian harmony, sharing resources equitably and making consensual collective decisions. In Sungir, there were clearly already Paleolithic celebrities, individuals whose social value was intrinsically linked to their ability to display wealth, beauty, and aesthetic sophistication. Even more disturbing, analyses of the spatial distribution of archaeological sites in the region suggest that Sungir was not an isolated anomaly. It was part of a network of Paleolithic settlements that shared similar ornamental traditions, indicating that stratification based on aesthetics had spread over a large geographical area. And here is the darkest and most philosophically uncomfortable aspect. To sustain this level of ceremonial ornamentation, the Paleolithic community of Sungir needed to allocate enormous human resources to activities that did not contribute directly to survival. Thousands of hours that could be invested in more efficient hunting, more systematic gathering, the manufacture of more durable tools, or the development of food preservation techniques were consciously directed toward pure vanity. Dr. Brian Hayden from Simon Fraser University, a scholar of social complexity in pre-agricultural societies, argues that Sungir represents evidence that social inequality was not invented by agriculture. It is older, more fundamental, more intrinsically human than we would like to admit. Imagine the social dynamic. While some members of the community spent weeks sculpting ornamental beads, others needed to compensate for this loss of productivity by hunting more, gathering more, working more to support not only their own families, but also the leisure time necessary to create art. It was essentially the birth of the first artistic class sustained by the labor of others, the first cultural elite, the first influencers in human history. The genetic legacy of beauty. Revolutionary genetic studies conducted by the Max Planck Institute revealed something surprising and scientifically crucial about the inhabitants of Sungir. They showed extremely low genetic diversity, suggesting a small and genetically isolated population, perhaps only 150 to 200 reproductively active individuals in the entire region. This makes their aesthetic sophistication even more impressive and sociologically significant. With limited resources, a tiny population, and all evolutionary pressures favoring investment in immediate survival, they consciously chose to prioritize beauty and aesthetic status. Why? The answer may lie in the Darwinian mechanisms of sexual selection, evolutionary processes that Charles Darwin identified as responsible for the development of seemingly useless characteristics, such as the peacock's extravagant tail, the huge antlers of moose, or the colorful plumage of tropical birds. In Sungir, elaborate ornamentation may have functioned as an evolutionary signal of genetic fitness. Individuals capable of sustaining such aesthetic luxury demonstrated superior genes, robust health, advanced cognitive abilities, and access to resources that made them extremely desirable reproductive partners. Dr. Christopher Henshilwood, from the University of Bergen, one of the world's leading authorities on human symbolic cognition, proposes that the Sungir ornaments represent archaeological evidence of the birth of modern symbolic cognition, the uniquely human ability to create complex abstract meanings through material objects. When that Paleolithic man chose to invest 3,000 hours in body ornamentation, he wasn't just being vain. He was demonstrating the capacity for long-term planning, abstract thought, fine motor skills, specialized knowledge, and, most importantly, the mental ability to imagine how others would perceive and judge him. Paleoneurological analyses of the Sungir skulls revealed cranial capacity comparable to that of modern humans, but with some interesting structural differences. The brain regions associated with visual processing and fine motor coordination were particularly developed, exactly the areas needed to create and appreciate complex art. In other words, when that Paleolithic man looked at himself in a frozen lake and decided that his natural appearance was not enough, that it needed to be improved, ornamented, transformed into living art, he was not just inventing vanity. He was inventing humanity as we know it, the ability to transcend basic biological needs through the pursuit of beauty and aesthetic meaning. The mirror of time. Today, humanity spends more than $500 billion annually on cosmetics, aesthetic surgeries, designer clothes and status accessories. We invest millions of hours daily in gyms, beauty salons, aesthetic treatments, and body ornamentation rituals. We think this is modern, a product of contemporary civilization, a consequence of consumer society and social networks. But when we look at Sungir, when we confront that Paleolithic Beckham buried 34,000 years ago in his frozen tomb, we realize a truth that is simultaneously fascinating and disturbing. Vanity may be literally our oldest, most fundamental, most intrinsically human characteristic. That Paleolithic man was no different from us. He woke up in the morning and worried about his appearance. He wanted to be admired for his beauty. He wanted to impress potential romantic partners. He wanted his image to transcend death, for his beauty to be remembered by future generations. And he succeeded, because here we are 34 millennia later, 1 to 360 human generations later, still talking about him, still admiring his ancestral vanity. Perhaps our modern obsession with physical appearance, social status, and aesthetic recognition is not a contemporary moral weakness. Maybe it is not superficiality, narcissism, or cultural decadence. Maybe it is our most human, oldest, most fundamental evolutionary heritage. Because at the historical moment when our Paleolithic ancestors decided that biological survival was not enough, that they needed to survive aesthetically, that they needed to be beautiful, admired, remembered. They separated us forever and irreversibly from the animal kingdom and transformed us into the unique species we are, the species that dreams of eternity through beauty. In Sungir, our ancestors did not just bury bodies adorned with thousands of ivory beads. They buried the first existential definition of what it means to be human, the transcendental need to transform life into art, survival into beauty, mortality into eternal memory. If this 34,000-year journey through time has made you question everything you thought you knew about human nature, if it has made you realize that our obsession with beauty and status is not modern superficiality, but an ancestral heritage deeply rooted in our evolution, like this video, share it with someone who needs to understand where we come from and subscribe to the channel, because prehistory is full of discoveries that will revolutionize your understanding of who we are and why we do what we do. And you, observing your own daily aesthetic care routine, how many hours do you invest in your personal ornamentation? Would your Paleolithic ancestors from Sungir, masters of primordial vanity, be proud of your dedication to beauty? Or would they realize that we have lost something essential along the way, that our vanity has become less artistic, less meaningful, less human?